My rule of thumb is if someone is going to have to die or be poisoned in a restaurant, I will make that one up.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Yes. Well, I don't want to get sued either.
I'm Robin Sessingham, and this is The Zest. Citrus, seafood, Spanish flavor, and Southern charm. The Zest celebrates cuisine and community in the Sunshine State. There's something cooking in Key West, and we're not just talking about the key lime pie. We'll hear from the author of some murder mysteries for foodies. Plus, a Florida chef tells us how to celebrate fall foods while it's still hot outside. It's time for sweet potatoes. Support for the Zest comes from Seitenbacher brand natural foods like muesli cereals, oils, oatmeal, energy bars, gluten-free fruit gummies for the kids, organic coffee, and more. Available in supermarkets, health food stores, or online at Seitenbacher.com. Lucy Burdette is the author of a series of mysteries starring a food critic living in Key West. Her newest is A Deadly Feast, the 9th book in the series, which all have fun names like Fatal Reservations and Killer Takeout. And another one in which food critic and amateur sleuth Hayley Snow stumbles upon crime and mayhem and great recipes in America's southernmost city. Lucy Burdette is the pen name for Roberta Islib, and she spoke to the Zest contributor Janet Keeler.
So why Key West?
When I was looking for a series to write, I talked with an editor who was looking for someone to write a series about a food critic, using a food critic as the protagonist, and preferably in a southern location. So at that time, my husband and I had started spending a lot of time in Key West, and it's just such a quirky, wonderful place that it seemed like the perfect background, and they agreed. So that's how it got started.
Well, the wonderful thing about the book is that, for anybody who's been to Key West, you recognize a lot of places because you use the real place names, like Mel Fisher Museum, Mallory Square, the Truman Annex, all kinds of places like that. So what's the reaction you get from readers when you do that?
Well, of course, I've gotten a few people who've written to say I was going the wrong direction down a one-way street. Or that sort of thing, which we try not to make those mistakes. But people who are fans of Key West, and there are some rabid fans of that little town, love these books because it brings them back to the setting that they've spent so many great hours in. I use a lot of real restaurants. My rule of thumb is if someone is going to have to die or be poisoned in a restaurant, I will make that one up.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Yes. Well, I don't want to get sued either.
So this book, this is a Deadly Feast, is number 9 in the series. And I have to say there's a lot of funny and fun names of some of the other books. Killer Takeout, Murder with Ganache, Topped Chef, all very fun names. And this one takes place around Thanksgiving, correct?
That's right.
So
yes.
the recipes, and it's nice to read a mystery book with recipes in the back, almost reads like a Thanksgiving menu, except for no turkey. But it's certainly
turkey,
you could
no.
definitely use some of these recipes for your own Thanksgiving, like the pecan pie bars and the cornbread sausage stuffing. So that's kind of a lot of fun. And Hayley Snow's holiday pumpkin pie. So tell me about Hayley Snow, our food critic.
So the first book was called An Appetite for Murder, and I invented Hayley Snow, who is in her 20s, who is kind of at loose ends, and she's from New Jersey. She meets a man in a bookstore who is buying a Mary Higgins Clark book for his mother, and they get to chatting. She falls madly in love, or so she thinks. And they communicate back and forth, and after not too much time, he says, "Why don't you come down and move in with me, which we all know would be a disaster. But she doesn't know that. So she does. And as the book opens, he has just kicked her out, and she has no job, no place to live. And so she starts from a low point and gradually gets her footing, makes friends, lands this job at Zest, and becomes a regular. So it's been a lot of fun to watch her grow.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's fun to have a character that goes from book to book. And I have to say, here at the Zest podcast, we love the name of the magazine.
I know, that's so
Zest.
funny.
Perfect. So do you have a lot more books under your belt here? Are you thinking about more? Always thinking about more ideas?
Well, I have The Key Lime Crime is the 10th book that I just sent in. It's finished. It will have to be edited and so on, but that one will be out next July.
And you have, as a writer, you have a relationship with Hayley Snow, don't you? Thinking about her a lot, probably.
Oh, I love these characters. This is how I start each book, not so much with the murder itself or the victim or the suspects, but with what's happening in Hayley's life. She's the main character, so of course she's the one that I focus the most on, but also with her friends. In that first book, for example, her mother was not in the picture at all. But in the second book, Death in Four Courses, Hayley invites her down to a food writing conference. This actually took place, and I attended it, so it's set there. And the mother likes it so well that she's gradually moved down, and by this A Deadly Feast, she's living there full-time with a catering job. So I don't know this ahead of time, but it starts to evolve from the last book to the one that I'm writing. So it's really a lot of fun.
Well, let's get back a little bit to talk about food. So have you been a food critic? Have you been a food writer?
No, is the short answer to that. I love to eat, and I like to cook. I wouldn't say I love to cook, but I love to eat, so I'm willing to cook. So when this editor suggested, could you write a food critic, I thought, why not? And so what I've done is read the books of all the critics, the Frank Bruni and Ruth Reichel and all the big food critics, to find out how they think about food and what it was like to be a critic. And of course, Hayley's in a different position than a New York Times food critic would be, because people know who she is, so she doesn't have to hide her identity. And she's probably gentler with her reviews than an actual critic would be.
Well, I think that sometimes is true, too, for a food critic at a smaller publication. You know the people a little bit more, and you don't want to particularly shut down a mom and pop. And, when you're writing for the New York Times. No, you have to live there. Yeah. Correct. And when you're writing for the New York Times, it's not that they want to shut restaurants down either, but it's just a different animal. I wonder, too, that each chapter of A Deadly Feast opens up with a quote, and a lot of them are from food writers. So I suspected exactly what you said, that you're a student of food writing for sure, because you quote M.F.K. Fisher and Pete Wells from the New York Times and many others. So I suspected that you were a student of food writing.
I love reading about food. There is a best food writing anthology that's published every year, so I always get that and often find quotes in there. But the other fun thing is just reading for pleasure, both mysteries and non-mysteries. You find out that some authors talk about food and it's part of their stories, and others, the characters might as well not be eating. So, for example, Anne Cleeves, who's a Scottish English mystery author who's had 2 TV shows, she has some of the most amazing quotes because she doesn't do a lot with food, but what she does shows exactly what's happening with her characters, what they're feeling, the rage, the fear. It's really fascinating to watch.
Well, I think that's true that, you find food in a lot of publications, a lot of stories that aren't particularly billed as food writing because it's such a big part of our lives. It's a good way to tell a story through food, even if it's not, classic food writing. Do you have? You said you like to eat and sometimes like to cook. Do you have favorite cookbooks of your own?
I have shelves and shelves of cookbooks, and I'm embarrassed to say a lot of times I end up going online these days. It's just so easy to type in what you want to cook, and all these recipes come up, and then you can browse through and tweak like mad. But I have all the old standards, The Joy of Cooking and The Silver Palette, and, well, I could go on and on, but...
Do you, since you like to eat out and you spend at least half your year in Key West and the other half up in Connecticut, right?
Right.
So where do you like to eat out in Key West?
Key West is now chock-a-block with good restaurants. And one thing is they change fairly often. It's such a tough business to be in to keep the people employed, and a place like Key West where the biggest season is in the winter and business slacks off, so you can lose people with that change. One of my favorites is called Seven Fish, so everybody's going to rush out to go to that one. But it's not a hole in the wall, but it's just absolutely reliably excellent. And fish.
Yes, which you really want to eat when you're in Key West,
right.
For sure.
But there's now a super pizza place. There are burrito places. The coffee is fantastic in Key West. I could go on and on.
It's a great place to visit. It's so much fun with the history and everything, and now of course the food. It's elevated a lot, isn't it? So
yes.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, and I look forward to Key Lime Crime. And that's the title of the next one, correct? Key Lime Crime.
Yes.
And that'll be
a good one.
So you're writing about one a year, I guess.
It's actually been 2 a year for the last couple years. I'm also finishing something that I was telling the producer on the way in, finishing something that's not a mystery, and there is a scene where the character is stumbling through a radio show. So this is perfect. I've got all the details.
There you go. Everything is fodder for a book.
Everything is material. It's exhausting.
Well, I really look forward to reading about the next place you're going to hide a body. I think that'll be fun.
That was Roberta Islib, also known as Lucy Burdette, talking to our contributor, Janet Keeler. We've got a recipe from A Daily Feast, decadent lobster, macaroni, and cheese, and you can find it on our website, thezestpodcast.com. The change of seasons is sort of a state of mind in Florida. It's still in the mid-90s, but when the temperature gets down into the 80s, and it will eventually, we call it fall and get out our boots and our scarves. And we want to mark the beginning of autumn with our food choices, too. The Zest producer Dalia Colon talked to Richard Anderson, the executive chef at Tampa's Oxford Exchange restaurant, about how to take some traditional fall foods and lighten them up for Florida.
Florida, we have, of course there's fall and spring and all that stuff, but it just blurs one right into the other. And then by the time you're like, I think tonight's the night I'm going to turn the heat on, it's warm again the next day. But yeah, at the restaurant, I make seasonal menu changes. And once fall comes, maybe lean more towards like some of the comfort foods, tomato soups and kind of warm chilies and things like that, where they're not going to order so much in June.
I do the same thing. Like as soon as it's 70 degrees, I'm like, I'm wearing my boots and my turtleneck and I'm making chili, but it's still hot outside.
It's still hot out, but it's December, so you feel like it's time. Yeah.
Is there a way we can adapt some of those recipes? Especially, like I'm from Ohio. I have albums, I store recipes in photo albums from my mom, and I have all these recipes that are from up north. We have a lot of people who come here seasonally, How can we adapt some of those heavier recipes for Florida?
I think just lighten up the ingredients. I think if it's more of the full comfort foods and maybe you're into more of like the gravies and the creams and the cheeses and season hits and you want to lighten it up a little bit, go more broths and citrus and chilies and fresh herb. And you can kind of play off the same recipe, but scaling back some of the heaviness and maybe some of the calories and lightening it all up, adding more citrus, like I said.
Are there any particular foods that you would be growing in your garden as it gets a little bit cooler out?
Once this extreme heat kind of goes away, you can plant all your radishes, your lettuces. I've grown tons of lettuces, Swiss chards, all that kind of works really well. It can still be hot, but all that humidity's down. Maybe the high is 80 and not 94.
It's a cold snap.
Yeah, literally, winter snap. It's a lot nicer outside, especially in the evening hours, so it's more pleasurable to be out there, messing around in your garden at the end of the day. I love growing root vegetables. I love growing carrots, radishes. I love potato. I kind of grew potatoes successfully once. They were a little funky shape.
Once.
Yeah, one time they had a little bit of, we'll call it rusticness to them. But definitely lettuces and green beans and cucumbers grow really well. I think all the stuff that requires a lot of water seems to do well because the heat's not just sucking them all dry. So cucumbers I always thought did pretty well. And I don't even know if it's by the book, if it's the right time according to the calendar, but it's worked well for me.
Right, you're no Farmer's Almanac, but
I don't. I'd be lying to everybody if I said I know exactly what grows in what month. But the general idea for me personally is once the heat dies down, I just think it opens up tons, and we don't have to worry about freezes too often. So I think we can cruise right through the winter months.
I love root vegetables, and to me they are so fall. Yeah. I usually just roast them with olive oil and salt. But do you have any more maybe creative ideas?
Creative, maybe, but you're on the right page. I mean, once potatoes are awesome and parsnips and carrots, and I think that is the best way to do it. I think just roasting them with olive oil, fresh herb, thyme, salt, pepper. I think just letting them be as good as they are. That's always been my little key to success is once it's good, all I'm looking to do is just accent it a little bit. I'm not trying to change it. I'm not trying to cover it. I'm not trying to hide it. If it's really good and I decide that's what I want for dinner, then I'm going to let that be its own thing.
I love that. Let them be as good as they are. Someone needs to cross-stitch that onto a pillow. Yeah. I do feel like we don't, I don't know, maybe you've come across this when you're talking to people. We feel like we have to do a lot of stuff to the food or we didn't really cook it. We don't deserve credit for it. What's your take on that?
That's my whole direction as a chef. Maybe that's some of the keys to where I've been successful in my career is I've always felt knowing when to stop is the most important part of the job. And once something is good, that's it for me. All I'm looking to do is just highlight that a little bit and just pump the brakes. And if you got something that's really good already that you want to sit down and eat a whole plateful, well, your job is now done. You don't have to continue building and plating and all this kind of extras. I think at a certain point it's a little bit of a waste and a misdirection.
Okay, this makes me think of Thanksgiving when we're talking about fall foods because I feel like you've got
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, but think Thanksgiving. Go to your happy place. Football is on. It's cold outside-ish. You're watching the parade. I feel like Thanksgiving is one of those occasions when we overdo the food. Like we have the sweet potatoes with the marshmallows on top and the green bean casserole and with the weird crunchy stuff. Can you offer any suggestions to kind of lighten up those classics? Yeah. What do you make Thanksgiving dinner?
I do, even if it's just 4 people at my house. We still make Thanksgiving depending on the amount of people. Maybe we scale it up or scale it back, but we always do a really good Thanksgiving dinner. But personally, I kind of lean just more towards healthier eating. I love the indulgence and I'll splurge and eat burgers and stuff too, but I definitely don't like covering my green beans in, mushroom soup and fried onions. I love good either sauteed green beans or roasted with tomatoes and garlic and lemon. I love all the classics of Thanksgiving, but I personally lean towards lightening all of them up a little bit.
All right, how do we lighten up the sweet potatoes with the marshmallows?
You don't add the marshmallows. Sweet potatoes are awesome, and if you roast them in their skins low and slow and you'll almost notice when you do it right, they almost have like a syrup that comes out of the skin. They turn into basically baby food. Once the sweet potatoes reach that baby food, they are so sweet, they're like candy already. I can't handle them with brown sugar and marshmallows. Then it's too sweet for me. Yeah. So if I'm going to make mashed sweet potatoes, once they get there, it's just some butter, some salt, a little bit of maybe coconut milk if you don't do dairy, and they're ready to be whipped and mashed and served.
Last thing, turkey. what do you do to your turkey? I gave up and I just buy the frozen, pre-seasoned one. But in my defense, I am a vegetarian, so I'm not about that life of like tasting. I'm not tasting it. I just need to know. And it's so high pressure. You wake up at the crack of dawn, you stick your hand in the cavity and you're doing all this gross stuff, and you have to wait like hours and hours before you even find out if you did a good job.
The turkey is what stresses everybody out, and it's really not that difficult. Always brine your turkey. That's my biggest pointer, brine your turkey, and all that is a water, salt, and sugar solution. So it helps put in seasoning into your turkey and moisture and drive some of that sodium into the turkey. It just gives you a much more moist bird once it's all done. But season it, roast it simply with a little bit of butter on the outside. I personally like to do it really low and slow until I get it close to the internal temp at like 165, 170. And then turn the heat up for the last 30 minutes, baste it in butter, and then get all my color on it. I think a lot of people start it too high and they get the bird, perfectly browned and it's still raw in the center. It's like, well, how am I going to get this thing from not burned to cooked in the center? I do it opposite. I'll go really low and slow, like 250, bring that thing up for a few hours, and then as it's getting closer and closer, start cranking the heat up to like 375, butter it, rotate it, and then once you get that golden color, hopefully it's matching the color to when it's about done on the inside.
It's like midnight.
It sounds complicated. It's pretty easy.
You've already eaten the pie, and it's like, okay, turkey's finally done.
Over. Yeah, everyone's eating pizza. It's over.
They ordered a pizza. Well, Chef Richard Anderson of Oxford Exchange, thank you so much.
You're welcome. This is fun. Thanks.
That was Richard Anderson, the executive chef at Oxford Exchange Restaurant, speaking to the Zest producer, Dalia Colon. That's it for our show today. How are you liking the Zest? Do you have an idea for a story? You can reach me at robin@thezestpodcast.com. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Search for us wherever you get your podcasts or check us out on thezestpodcast.com. I'm Robin Sussingham. Dalia Colon and I produce The Zest with help from Mark Hayes, Megan Tremble, and Craig George. The Zest is a production of WUSF Public Media.